Her village, she found it both familiar and strange. Her house still stood, occupied by a family who had lost their own home in the fighting. She did not ask them to leave. Instead, she found a smaller house on the edge of the village and began the slow process of rebuilding her life. She planted a new garden. She helped neighbors repair damage from the war. She visited her father's grave, which someone had maintained in her absence, keeping the grass trimmed and the cross standing straight. People in the village welcomed her return but asked few questions about where she had been. Everyone had stories they did not want to share, memories too painful to speak about. They accepted that Marina had survived somehow and returned home. That was enough. They did not need to know about the sniper, about the 3 generals, about the price that had been on her head. Those secrets remained locked inside Marina, carried silently like scars that never fully healed. Victor visited her a month after her return. He was older now, his face lined with stress and exhaustion from years of fighting. But he was alive and he smiled when he saw Marina. They sat in her new garden, drinking tea and talking about simple things like they used to. Victor never directly said he knew what she had done, but his eyes told her he understood. He thanked her for giving them all hope when hope seemed impossible. He said the war might have gone very differently if one brave person had not struck back when everyone else was too afraid. Marina accepted his gratitude quietly but did not feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had survived terrible things by doing terrible things in return. She had taken 3 lives, ended 3 men's existence on Earth, and she would carry that knowledge forever. Justice, revenge, necessity, whatever words people used to justify killing, it all came down to the same thing. She had looked through a scope and chosen to pull the trigger. That choice had consequences beyond just the deaths of her targets. It had consequences for her soul that she was still learning to understand and accept. Years continued to pass. The region healed slowly. New buildings replaced destroyed ones. Children who had never known peace grew up in villages where fear was fading. Marina aged along with everyone else, her dark hair developing streaks of gray, her face showing lines that reflected both hardship and survival. She never married, never had children, never lived a conventional life, but she found peace in small things. Working in her garden, reading books by the fire, walking through forests that no longer hid soldiers or danger. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Marina would walk to her father's grave and tell him about her life. She talked about the changes in the village, about neighbors and their families, about seasons and harvests. She never talked about the 3 generals or what she had done to avenge his death. That remained between her and the darkness of those terrible years. Her father would have understood anyway. He taught her to hunt, to be patient, to take the shot when it mattered most. She had learned those lessons well, perhaps too well. But she survived when survival seemed impossible, and maybe that was enough. Marina left her village before dawn on a cold morning in late autumn. She walked down the familiar dirt road carrying only her small pack, dressed like any other refugee fleeing the war zone. The rifle was disassembled and hidden in her pack, wrapped in cloth to avoid detection at checkpoints. She did not look back at her house or the village. Looking back would make leaving harder, and she needed all her strength for what lay ahead. The journey to the border would take at least a week, traveling by foot and occasional rides in carts or trucks. The resistance had arranged safe houses along the route where Marina could rest and get information about enemy movements. But between these safe points, she was alone and vulnerable. Every checkpoint was a risk. Every soldier she passed might recognize something suspicious. Her false documents were good but not perfect. They would hold up under casual inspection, but might fail if someone looked too closely. The first 2 days passed without incident. Marina walked through countryside she knew well, keeping to back roads and forest paths. She saw other refugees traveling in small groups, families carrying their possessions, old people moving slowly with the help of younger relatives. The war had displaced thousands. Marina blended into this sad parade of humanity, just another face among many, unremarkable and forgettable. On the 3rd day, she reached a checkpoint on the main road toward the border. Soldiers were checking everyone's documents and searching bags. Marina joined the line of waiting refugees, her heart beating faster but her face showing only tired resignation. When her turn came, she handed her false papers to a young soldier who barely looked at them before waving her through. But an officer standing nearby called her back. He wanted to search her pack. Marina's mind raced through possibilities as she opened the pack. The rifle components were hidden well, but a thorough search would find them. If that happened, she would have to fight or run, and either option would likely end in her death or capture. The officer sorted through her clothes and belongings with rough efficiency. His hand touched the wrapped rifle barrel but did not recognize what it was through the cloth. He pulled out her water bottle, unscrewed the cap, smelled it, then handed everything back. He was looking for weapons or contraband, but his search was routine, not inspired by suspicion. Marina repacked her belongings slowly, forcing her hands not to shake, and walked away from the checkpoint without looking back. The close call shook her more than she wanted to admit. She had been seconds away from discovery and disaster, but it also taught her something important. The enemy was looking for obvious threats, weapons they could recognize immediately, suspicious behavior. They were not looking for a young woman traveling alone with a pack full of clothes. Her disguise as a refugee was more effective than she had hoped. She just needed to maintain it perfectly and never give them a reason to look closer. 4 days into her journey, Marina reached a safe house in a town near the border. The house belonged to an elderly couple who had been helping the resistance for years. They welcomed Marina warmly, giving her a real bed to sleep in and hot food to eat. She stayed there for 2 days, resting and regaining her strength. The couple asked no questions about who she was or what she had done. They simply provided shelter and kindness, two precious things in a time of war. During those 2 days, Marina learned that the border crossing had become more difficult. The enemy had increased security, anticipating that important resistance members might try to escape the region. Additional soldiers patrolled the border area. New checkpoints appeared every few kilometers. Dogs were being used to search for hidden contraband. The elderly couple suggested Marina wait for a better time, perhaps a few weeks until security relaxed. But Marina knew waiting was dangerous. Every day she stayed in the region increased the risk of being identified and captured. On her 7th day away from home, Marina approached the border zone. The landscape here was different from her home region. Rolling hills gave way to rocky terrain with sparse vegetation. Few people lived in this area, which meant fewer places to hide but also fewer people to notice her. She traveled by night now, sleeping during the day in whatever shelter she could find. Her food supplies were running low, but crossing the border mattered more than hunger. The actual border was a river, wide and fast-flowing, separating the occupied territory from neutral ground beyond. Bridges across the river were heavily guarded. The resistance had told Marina about a crossing point 5 kilometers upstream from the nearest bridge. The river was narrower there and the current less dangerous. Local smugglers used this spot to move goods back and forth. For the right price, they would help people cross as well. Marina found the crossing point just before midnight. A small boat was hidden in the reeds along the riverbank. Nearby, a man waited in the shadows. He was the smuggler the resistance had arranged for her to meet. He looked Marina over carefully, noting her pack and her bearing. He asked for payment, and Marina handed him the money the resistance had provided. The smuggler counted it slowly, then nodded. He would take her across, but they had to go immediately. Patrols came through this area every few hours. They pushed the boat into the water and climbed in. The smuggler rowed silently, powerful strokes moving them quickly across the dark river. Marina could see lights from guard posts on both banks, but they were far enough away that the small boat remained invisible in the darkness. Halfway across, the current caught them, pushing the boat downstream. The smuggler compensated expertly, adjusting his rowing to keep them on course toward the landing point on the far bank. When they reached the other side, Marina jumped out into shallow water and waded to shore. The smuggler pushed off immediately without a word, rowing back across to pick up his next customer or cargo. Marina was alone again, but she was across the border, beyond the reach of the occupation forces. She felt relief wash over her like a wave. She had made it. She was free. The neutral territory beyond the river was controlled by a different government, one that had refused to take sides in the war. Refugees were tolerated here but not welcomed. Marina would need to register with authorities, undergo questioning, and eventually be assigned to a refugee camp. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight she just walked inland from the river, putting distance between herself and the border, breathing air that felt different somehow because it came from free ground. Marina walked until dawn, then found a barn where she could sleep undisturbed. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained from the week-long journey and the constant tension. She slept deeply for the first time since leaving her village, with no fear of soldiers bursting through her door. When she woke in the afternoon, she felt different, lighter. The weight of constant danger had lifted, replaced by a different kind of uncertainty about the future. Over the following weeks, Marina established a new life in the refugee camp where she was assigned. It was a crowded, difficult place where thousands of people waited for the war to end or for permission to travel elsewhere. But it was safe. No one here was searching for a sniper. No one connected the quiet young woman to the legendary ghost who killed 3 generals. Marina kept her rifle hidden and her secrets guarded. She helped other refugees, teaching children to read, assisting in the camp kitchens, making herself useful without standing out. Months passed, then years. The war continued in the occupied territories, but slowly the tide began to turn. Without their brutal generals, without their air of invincibility, the enemy forces started losing ground. The resistance grew stronger and more organized. Other regions joined the fight. What had seemed like an endless occupation began to crack and crumble. Victory was no longer impossible to imagine. Marina heard news from her home region through new refugees arriving at the camp. Her village still stood, damaged but surviving. Victor was alive and leading a larger resistance cell now. The story of the female sniper had become legend, told in whispers around campfires and in hidden resistance meetings. Some people said the sniper was a spirit sent by the war dead to take revenge. Others said she was a foreign agent sent to destabilize the occupation. No one knew the truth. Marina kept her silence and let the legends grow. Truth was dangerous. Mystery was protection. 5 years after Marina killed the 3 generals, the war finally ended. The occupation forces withdrew, defeated by a combination of military pressure, international sanctions, and the collapse of their will to fight. The region was free again. Refugees began returning home, rebuilding their lives from the ruins left behind. Marina prepared to return as well, though she knew she could never truly go back. Too much had changed. She had changed too much. Before leaving the camp, Marina visited the place where she had buried her rifle, wrapped in waterproof cloth and hidden deep in the ground. She dug it up and examined it carefully. The weapon was still in perfect condition, preserved and ready. But Marina did not take it with her. Instead, she dismantled it completely, separating each component and scattered the pieces in different locations where they would never be found or reassembled. That part of her life was over. She was not a hunter or a sniper anymore. She was just a woman going home. When Marina finally returned to... The weeks following General Petrov's death were the most dangerous of Marina's life. The enemy's search for the sniper intensified to levels no one expected. Checkpoints appeared on every road. Soldiers conducted house-to-house searches repeatedly, sometimes visiting the same village 3 times in 1 week. Informants were everywhere, encouraged by the enormous bounty and threatened by brutal consequences for hiding information. Marina maintained her simple routine with discipline that bordered on obsession. Every morning she worked in her garden, visible to anyone who passed by. Every afternoon she cleaned her house or walked to the market. Every evening she sat by her window, reading or sewing like a woman with nothing to hide. She spoke to her neighbors about ordinary things like weather and crops. She showed concern about the military presence like everyone else. She became perfectly and visibly normal. But at night, after the village fell asleep, Marina became someone else. She checked her escape routes, making sure they remained clear and accessible. She maintained her rifle, keeping it hidden in a space beneath her floorboards that even careful searchers had missed. She practiced moving silently through her house in complete darkness, preparing for the moment soldiers might come for her at night. She was 2 people now, split between the quiet village woman and the lethal hunter who lived in shadows. Victor visited less frequently now, understanding that contact with resistance members put Marina at risk. But he still brought news when necessary. The impact of the generals' deaths had spread far beyond the local region. The enemy's entire command structure was reorganizing. New generals had been assigned, but they refused to travel without massive security details. Some refused to come to the region at all, requesting transfers to safer areas. The occupation, while still brutal, had become cautious and hesitant. Soldiers no longer acted with the same arrogance. They knew someone was watching. 3 months after Petrov's death, something changed. The intensive searches began to decrease. Checkpoints became less frequent. Patrols returned to their normal schedules. It seemed the enemy was accepting that the sniper had disappeared, perhaps had fled the region or gone into deep hiding. The extraordinary measures could not continue forever. Soldiers needed to return to their regular duties. The war continued on other fronts. The hunt for one sniper, however effective, could not consume unlimited resources indefinitely. Marina felt relief but remained cautious. She knew how hunts worked. Sometimes the prey escaped because the hunter gave up, but sometimes the hunter just changed tactics, appearing to give up while actually watching and waiting for the prey to relax and make a mistake. She would not make that mistake. Her vigilance remained absolute even as life in the village slowly returned to something resembling normality. During this period, Marina began to understand the full extent of what she had accomplished. Victor brought her letters from people across the region, letters they could not send to her directly but wanted her to know about. Families thanked the unknown sniper for avenging their losses. Resistance fighters wrote about how the killings had inspired them to keep fighting. Some letters were from children, asking if the sniper was real or just a story their parents told to give them hope. Reading these letters, Marina felt a complicated mixture of emotions: pride, sadness, responsibility, and a deep weariness. She had never wanted to be a symbol or a hero. She just wanted justice for her father. But symbols did not get to choose what they represented. People needed to believe in something, someone who could strike back against overwhelming power. She had become that belief whether she wanted it or not. The burden of that role weighed on her more heavily than the physical dangers she faced. One evening, 6 months after Petrov's death, Marina had a visitor she did not expect. An old woman came to her door just after sunset, asking for water and a place to rest. Marina did not recognize her, which was unusual in a small village where everyone knew everyone. But the old woman seemed harmless, tired from traveling, her clothes worn and dusty. Marina invited her inside, offering bread and tea along with the water. They sat in Marina's kitchen talking about simple things. The old woman said she was traveling to visit family in the next village. She complained about the checkpoints and the soldiers. She asked Marina if she had been affected much by the war. Marina answered carefully, saying the same things everyone in the village said, offering no information that would seem suspicious. The old woman listened and nodded, appearing satisfied with the answers. As the old woman prepared to leave, she paused at the door and looked at Marina with eyes that suddenly seemed much sharper and younger than before. She spoke in a different voice, lower and more serious. She said she had a message from someone important, someone who wanted Marina to know that her work was appreciated but also extremely dangerous. The enemy had not given up searching. They had only changed methods. Informants were still everywhere, some wearing unexpected faces, asking innocent questions, building profiles of everyone in the region. Marina's hand moved instinctively toward the knife she kept in her belt, hidden under her jacket. But the old woman shook her head and smiled. She was not an enemy, she explained. She was a messenger from the resistance leadership. Someone Victor had sent to warn Marina personally because even Victor's visits were being watched now. The disguise as an old traveler was necessary, because the enemy was tracking everyone who visited Marina's house, no matter how briefly. The messenger delivered her warning quickly and clearly. The enemy knew the sniper was a local person, someone who knew the region intimately. They had narrowed their list of suspects to about 50 people based on skills, opportunity, and absence from villages during the times of the shootings. Marina was on that list, not at the top because she was young and female, which the enemy considered unlikely. But she was on the list, and that meant they were watching her, building a case, waiting for evidence. The messenger advised Marina to consider leaving the region entirely. The resistance could arrange passage to another country, a new identity, safety far from here. She had done enough. Her mission was complete. Staying here meant eventual capture or death. It was only a matter of time. The messenger spoke urgently but kindly, making it clear this was advice from people who cared about Marina's survival, not an order she had to follow. After the messenger left, Marina sat alone in her dark kitchen for hours, thinking. Everything the woman said made sense. Staying was dangerous and becoming more dangerous every day. The smart decision, the logical decision, was to disappear while she still could. But leaving meant abandoning her father's house, the place where all her memories lived. It meant never visiting his grave again. never seeing the village where she grew up. It meant becoming a permanent exile, cut off from everything she knew. Marina walked to the window and looked out at the night. Stars filled the sky above the village, the same stars her father used to point out and name when she was a child. He taught her to navigate by those stars, to find her way home no matter how far she wandered. But now there was a price on her head, and home was the most dangerous place she could be. The irony was bitter and painful. Over the next few days, Marina prepared for departure while trying not to show any change in her routine. She gathered only what she could carry easily. A small pack with clothes, money she had saved, documents, and of course her rifle. Everything else, all the furniture and belongings her father left behind, would remain. Perhaps someday, if she survived long enough, she could return. But she was not foolish enough to believe that would happen. Once she left, she would probably never see this place again. Victor came one final time to say goodbye. He brought papers with a new identity for Marina, documents created by resistance forgers. She would travel as a refugee heading west toward the border. The resistance would help her cross into neutral territory where the enemy could not follow. From there, she would be on her own, free but alone. Victor's eyes were wet with tears as he hugged her goodbye. She had given the resistance something precious, hope and proof that the enemy could be beaten. He would never forget her, he promised, and neither would anyone else who knew what she had done. The night before her planned departure, Marina visited her father's grave one last time. She knelt beside the simple wooden cross and spoke to him in whispers, telling him everything she had done, everything she had become. She apologized for not being able to stay and care for his resting place. She promised to remember him always, to carry his lessons with her wherever she went. She cried for the first time since his death, allowing herself this one moment of grief before she had to become strong again for the journey ahead. As Marina walked back to her house in the darkness, she felt the weight of every decision she had made. 3 men were dead by her hand. Perhaps they deserved it, perhaps justice had been served, but the weight remained. She carried it now like a physical burden, something that would never leave her. This was the price of revenge, she realized. Not just the danger to her life, but the permanent mark on her soul. The knowledge of what she was capable of when pushed to the edge. 3 vehicles appeared on the eastern road, moving slowly through the darkness with their lights dimmed. Marina's heart rate increased slightly but remained controlled. This was what she had been waiting for. The vehicles entered the town, their engines echoing off the buildings. From her position in the bell tower, she could see everything perfectly. The convoy moved cautiously as if the driver sensed danger but could not identify its source. Through her rifle scope, Marina studied each vehicle carefully. The first was a military truck with soldiers in the back. The second was a black command car with armored plating and small windows. The third was another truck providing rear security. This matched the intelligence Victor had provided. The general would be in the middle vehicle, the armored car, surrounded by protection on both sides. As the convoy passed beneath the church tower, Marina adjusted her aim. The command car's windows were small and probably bulletproof, but the vehicle had to have a weakness. She noticed the driver's window was partially open, probably to improve visibility in the darkness. That window was her target. If she could fire through that opening, the bullet might continue through the interior and reach the general in the back seat. The angle was difficult. Marina had to shoot almost straight down, accounting for gravity's effect on the bullet's path. She had practiced this angle in the forest, but practicing on targets and shooting at a moving vehicle were completely different. She would have one chance. Missing meant the convoy would speed away, and Petrov would disappear forever. Worse, missing would reveal her position, trapping her in the tower. Marina's breathing slowed. Her finger touched the trigger. The convoy continued moving at a steady pace directly below her. She could hear voices from the soldiers, tense and alert. They knew they were vulnerable here, exposed in the open street. But they were looking at the buildings beside them, at the windows and doorways, searching for threats at ground level. None of them thought to look up at the old church tower. The command car rolled into perfect position. Marina's crosshairs settled on the open driver's window. She could see the driver's profile, his hands on the steering wheel. Beyond him, she could see the shadow of someone in the back seat. That had to be Petrov. The rifle fired, the sound cracking through the silent town like thunder. The bullet entered the driver's window. passed through the driver's head and continued into the back seat. Through the scope, Marina saw the driver slump forward. The command car swerved suddenly, its front tire hitting the curb. The vehicle behind it nearly crashed into its rear. Soldiers jumped from both trucks, shouting and confused. Some fired their weapons wildly, shooting at shadows. Others surrounded the command car, trying to open its doors. Marina did not wait to see more. She was already moving. She ran down the tower stairs, taking them two at a time, her rifle in one hand. Speed was everything now. The soldiers would realize where the shot came from within seconds. They would surround the church and trap her inside. She had to reach the ground floor and escape before they organized. Her footsteps echoed in the narrow stairwell. Behind her, she heard shouting voices growing louder. The soldiers were coming. Marina burst through a side door of the church that opened into a small garden. She had scouted this exit earlier, knowing she would need an escape route the enemy would not expect. The garden was surrounded by a low stone wall. She vaulted over it and ran into the alley beyond. Behind her, she heard soldiers entering the church, their boots heavy on the floor. Someone shouted orders to search the tower. She ran through the dark alleys of the town, moving away from the main street. She knew these types of towns from her childhood. They all had the same layout, the same narrow passages between buildings, the same hidden routes. She turned corners randomly, doubling back, creating a confusing trail. Soldiers were flooding into the town now, setting up a perimeter, beginning a systematic search. But Marina was like water, flowing through gaps they did not know existed. She reached the outskirts of town and dove into a drainage ditch that ran along the road. The ditch was wet and cold, filled with mud and debris. Marina crawled through it, keeping her head down, moving away from the town. She could hear vehicles racing past on the road above, soldiers shouting to each other, dogs barking. The enemy was bringing everything they had to find her. But she was already slipping away into the darkness. 2 kilometers from town, Marina climbed out of the ditch and entered a forest. She ran deeper into the trees, putting distance between herself and the search parties. Her clothes were soaked and muddy. Her rifle was wet but still functional. Everything hurt, but she was alive and free. Behind her, lights from vehicles and searchlights swept across the landscape. But they were searching the wrong areas, always one step behind. Marina traveled through the forest for hours, not stopping until dawn. By then she was 15 kilometers from the town, exhausted but safe. She found a hollow tree and crawled inside, wrapping herself in her jacket for warmth. She allowed herself to close her eyes, but her mind remained alert, listening to the sounds of the forest. If soldiers came close, she would hear them long before they found her. She woke in the late afternoon to silence. No helicopters overhead, no voices in the distance. She emerged from the hollow tree cautiously, scanning the forest. Everything appeared normal. Birds sang in the trees. Wind rustled through leaves. The enemy had either given up searching this area or never came this far. Marina began walking again, heading toward her village by an indirect route. It took 3 days to reach home. She traveled only at night, hiding during the day. She ate berries and roots, avoiding any contact with people. When she finally reached her village, it was in chaos. Soldiers had been there, searching every house, questioning every person. They were looking for the sniper, the ghost who had killed 3 generals. They had torn apart buildings, arrested several resistance fighters, and threatened the entire population. Marina entered her house through the back door after midnight, expecting to find it destroyed. Instead, everything was intact. The soldiers had searched it but found nothing because there was nothing to find. She kept no evidence, no documents, nothing that could connect her to the operations. Her rifle was with her always. She had learned from her father to leave no traces, to be invisible even when you were standing in plain sight. The next morning, Victor came to her house before dawn. His face was pale and worried. He told her what had happened after the shooting in the town. The command car had crashed and soldiers had surrounded it immediately. When they opened the doors, they found the driver dead and General Petrov dying in the back seat. The bullet had struck him in the chest after passing through the driver. He lived for another 10 minutes, long enough to whisper orders to find the sniper, to make whoever did this pay. Then he died, the last of the 3 generals, killed by a ghost he never saw. The enemy command structure was in complete disarray. 3 generals dead within 3 months, each killed by what appeared to be a single sniper operating alone. The occupation forces were terrified. Officers were refusing dangerous assignments. Soldiers were deserting. The invincible image of the enemy had shattered. They could not protect their own leaders. How could they protect anyone? Morale had collapsed across the entire region. But Victor also brought a warning. The enemy had placed a massive bounty on the sniper's head. 100,000 gold coins for information leading to the capture or death of whoever killed the generals. Soldiers were interrogating everyone using torture when necessary. They were desperate and dangerous. Marina had to be more careful than ever. One mistake, one person remembering something suspicious, and she would be caught. Marina listened to all this with her usual calm expression. She felt no pride in what she had accomplished, no satisfaction in the death of her enemies. She felt only exhaustion and a strange emptiness. Her mission was complete. The 3 generals were dead. Justice for her father had been delivered 3 times over. But it did not bring her father back. It did not undo the pain. It only created more death in a war that seemed endless. Victor asked her what she would do now. The resistance wanted her to continue, to target other enemy commanders, to keep striking fear into the occupation forces. But Marina shook her head. She was done. She had accomplished what she set out to do. She was a hunter, not a soldier. She had taken the prey she was hunting. Now she just wanted to return to her quiet life, to tend her garden, to remember her father in peace. But Marina knew deep inside that peace would not come easily. The enemy would never stop searching for her. The bounty on her head would attract hunters and informants. She would have to remain vigilant, always watching, always ready to run or fight. The price of her revenge was permanent exile from the normal life she once knew. She had become something else, something dangerous and hunted. There was no going back. The enemy's response to Yashin's death was swift and brutal. Soldiers swept through villages, searching houses, interrogating anyone they considered suspicious. Roadblocks appeared on every major route. Patrols increased in frequency and size. Helicopters flew over the forests, searching for signs of movement. The occupation forces were angry and afraid. 2 of their generals had been killed by a ghost, an invisible enemy they could not find or stop. Marina stayed away from her village for 10 days after killing Yashin. She moved through the wilderness like an animal, sleeping in caves and abandoned buildings, avoiding all contact with people. She knew the enemy would be watching her village, waiting to see if anyone returned who had been absent during the attacks. So she waited, living on what she could forage and hunt with small snares. Her rifle stayed wrapped and hidden, ready but unused. During those days alone, Marina thought about what she had become. She was no longer the young woman who tended her garden and lived quietly in her father's house. She was a killer now, someone who took lives from a distance, coldly and efficiently. Some people would call her a hero. Others would call her a murderer. She did not care about either label. She cared only about finishing what she started. General Petrov remained alive, still giving orders, still destroying lives. Until he was dead, her mission was incomplete. When Marina finally returned to her village, she came at night, slipping into her house through the back door. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The garden was overgrown with weeds. Dust covered the furniture. But no one had entered or disturbed anything. She was relieved. If soldiers had searched her house, they would have torn it apart, looking for weapons or evidence. The fact that everything remained untouched meant they had not connected her to the killings. The next morning, she emerged from her house and resumed her normal routine. Neighbors saw her and rushed over with questions. Where had she been? Were they safe? What did she know about the shootings? Marina lied easily, saying she had been staying with distant relatives in another village, too afraid to travel during all the military activity. People believed her because they wanted to believe her. They wanted to think one of their own could not be capable of such violence. Victor visited her that evening, relief obvious on his face. He had been worried about her, uncertain if she had survived or been captured. Marina assured him she was fine, though she showed him her damaged hands as evidence of her difficult journey. They sat in her kitchen like always, drinking tea while Victor shared news. The resistance was growing stronger. More people were joining after seeing that the generals could be touched, could be killed. Fear was turning into courage across the region, but Victor also brought difficult news. General Petrov had become almost impossible to reach. After Yashin's death, Petrov had withdrawn completely into the fortified headquarters in the regional capital. He no longer traveled. He no longer made public appearances. All his orders came through subordinates and radio communications. The headquarters itself was a converted government building, surrounded by high walls, guard towers, and multiple security checkpoints. Hundreds of soldiers protected the compound at all times. Marina listened to this information without showing disappointment. She had expected Petrov to hide. It was the logical response. But hiding forever was impossible. Eventually, he would have to emerge, to move, to make a mistake. Her job was to be ready when that moment came. She asked Victor to have the resistance watch the headquarters constantly, noting every vehicle that entered or left, every pattern, every routine. Information was ammunition now. Weeks passed. Marina resumed her quiet life in the village, but every evening Victor brought updates about the headquarters. The resistance had people in the capital who could observe the compound safely. They reported strict routines, heavy security, and no sign that Petrov planned to leave. Supply trucks entered the compound daily. Military vehicles came and went. But no command cars, no convoys, nothing that might carry the general. Marina grew frustrated but remained patient. She knew impatience led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. So she waited and continued her preparations. She cleaned her rifle daily, maintaining it perfectly. She practiced her shooting in the forest at night. Using suppressed targets to avoid detection, she studied maps of the capital, memorizing streets, buildings, and escape routes. When the opportunity came, she would need to act quickly and decisively. 2 months after Yashin's death, Victor arrived at Marina's house with urgent news. The resistance had learned that Petrov was planning to relocate to a more secure facility near the coast. The move would happen in 3 days. Intelligence suggested Petrov would travel by convoy at night, taking back roads to avoid attention. The route passed through rural areas with limited security. This might be Marina's only chance. The information came from a source inside the enemy command structure, someone the resistance had cultivated for months. Victor trusted the source completely, but Marina was cautious. The intelligence seemed too perfect, too convenient. After 2 successful operations, the enemy would be desperate to catch the sniper. Setting a trap was exactly what she would do in their position. She told Victor she needed to verify the information independently before committing to an operation. Over the next 2 days, Marina traveled to the capital herself. She took a bus like an ordinary civilian, carrying nothing suspicious, just a small bag with clothes and documents. In the capital, she walked past the military headquarters, observing it from a distance like a curious villager. She noted the security, the vehicles, the activity level. Everything appeared normal, consistent with what the resistance had reported. She also walked portions of the route the convoy supposedly would take. She studied the terrain, the buildings, the possible ambush locations. Some spots seemed promising, but others made her nervous. Too open, too exposed, too easy to surround. If this was a trap, the enemy would position soldiers in hidden locations waiting for her to reveal herself. The more she studied the route, the more convinced she became that this operation carried extreme risk. On the evening before the supposed convoy departure, Marina made her decision. She would take the shot, but not where the enemy expected. If they were laying a trap, they would position forces along the most obvious ambush points, the places a normal sniper would choose. Marina would choose somewhere unexpected, somewhere that seemed impossible. She would turn their trap into her advantage. The route passed through a small town about 40 kilometers from the capital. In the center of the town stood an old church with a tall bell tower. The tower was the highest point in the area, overlooking the main street where the convoy would pass. It was also the last place anyone would expect a sniper to hide. Too obvious, too exposed, too difficult to escape from. Therefore, it was perfect. Marina entered the town the afternoon before the convoy was scheduled to pass through. She wore simple clothes and carried a basket, looking like a woman going to market. She walked to the church casually, not hurrying, not drawing attention. The church doors were unlocked, as they always were in small towns. Inside, the church was empty and quiet. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, creating colored patterns on the floor. The stairs to the bell tower were narrow and steep. Marina climbed slowly, listening for any sounds above. The tower had not been used in years. Cobwebs covered the corners. Bird droppings littered the floor. When she reached the top, she found a small room with open arches on all 4 sides, allowing the sound of bells to carry across the town. The bells themselves were long gone, removed during an earlier war and melted down for metal. From the tower, Marina could see the entire town. The main street ran straight through the center, exactly as shown on her map. Any convoy traveling this route would have to pass directly below her position. The distance would be less than 100 meters, almost point-blank range for a rifle. She found a spot in the shadows where she could position herself with a clear view, while remaining invisible from below. Marina settled in to wait through the night. She had brought only essential supplies, water, and a small amount of food, along with her rifle and ammunition. The tower was cold and uncomfortable, but she had endured worse. She sat with her back against the wall, the rifle across her lap, and watched the street below as darkness fell over the town. Lights came on in houses and shops. People walked home from work. Everything looked peaceful and normal, like the war was happening somewhere else. Midnight passed. Then 1 in the morning. Marina's eyes grew heavy, but she forced herself to stay alert. False information or not, she had to be ready. If the convoy appeared, she would have only seconds to act. At 2:30 in the morning, she heard engines in the distance. Her fatigue vanished instantly. She moved to the archway and raised her rifle, peering through the scope toward the eastern approach to town. Marina spent 5 days watching the mountain road where General Yashin traveled. She did not take up a shooting position yet. She was studying, learning the patterns, understanding how the enemy moved and thought. Every morning before dawn, she hiked into the mountains and found hidden spots where she could observe without being seen. Every evening after dark, she returned home. The road wound through difficult terrain, climbing steadily toward the command post on the hilltop. Enemy patrols walked this road regularly now, more frequently than before Volkov's death. They were nervous, alert, checking the forests on both sides. Twice a day, military vehicles drove up and down, their occupants scanning the surrounding area. The enemy knew a sniper was operating in the region, but they did not know where or when she would strike next. On the 4th day of observation, Marina saw Yashin's convoy. 3 armored vehicles moved slowly up the mountain road, their engines straining on the steep grade. Soldiers stood in the back of the trucks, their weapons ready, watching the tree line. The vehicles maintained distance between each other, making it harder for any ambush to hit multiple targets. Yashin rode in the middle vehicle, protected on both sides. Marina watched from 800 meters away, too far for a shot, but close enough to study everything. She noticed how the convoy slowed at certain points where the road narrowed or curved sharply. She noticed how the guards focused more on the forest side than the cliff side, probably thinking no one could approach from that direction. She noticed that at one particular curve, the middle vehicle had to slow almost to a stop to navigate the tight turn. That curve became her focus. The cliff side of that curve had a small rocky outcrop about 20 meters below the road level. Trees and bushes grew from cracks in the rock, providing cover. The distance from that outcrop to the road was less than 200 meters. If Marina could reach that position and wait there, she would have a clear shot when the convoy slowed at the curve. But getting to that outcrop was extremely dangerous. The approach would require climbing down a steep cliff face with no rope or safety equipment. One slip would mean falling 30 meters onto sharp rocks. Even if she reached the outcrop safely, she would be trapped there. After taking the shot, climbing back up would be impossible with soldiers searching for her. She would have to find another way out, probably descending the cliff completely and escaping through the valley below. Marina spent an entire day studying the cliff. She climbed partway down twice to test the route, finding handholds and stable rocks. It was possible, but barely. She would have to make the climb in darkness to avoid being seen. She would have to carry her rifle and supplies while climbing. One mistake would end everything. But Marina had grown up climbing trees and rocks with her father. He taught her to trust her hands and feet, to move with confidence even in dangerous places. 3 days later, Victor brought word that Yashin would visit the command post again. Marina prepared immediately. She ate a good meal, knowing she might not eat again for 24 hours. She checked her rifle one final time, loading it carefully. She dressed in dark clothing and tied everything down so nothing would rattle or shift while climbing. Then she hiked into the mountains, arriving at the cliff top just after sunset. Darkness fell quickly in the mountains. Marina waited for the last light to disappear completely before beginning her descent. The cliff face was cold under her hands. She moved slowly, testing each handhold before trusting her weight to it. The rifle on her back made balance difficult. Several times she had to pause, pressing her body against the rock, breathing slowly to stay calm. Her fingers found cracks and edges in the stone. Her feet wedged into narrow gaps. Bit by bit, she lowered herself toward the outcrop. The climb took nearly 2 hours. By the time she reached the outcrop, her hands were scraped and bleeding. Her shoulders ached from the strain of supporting her weight and the rifle, but she had made it. The outcrop was larger than it looked from above, a flat area of rock about 3 meters across. Bushes and small trees grew around the edges, providing perfect concealment. Marina settled into position, arranging the bushes to hide her shape while still allowing a clear line of sight to the road above. Then she waited through the night. The temperature dropped steadily. Cold wind blew through the mountains, making her fingers numb. She could not move much or make noise, so she endured the cold without complaint. This was part of being a hunter. Comfort did not matter. Only the shot mattered. She wrapped her hands around her body periodically to keep blood flowing. She flexed her fingers inside her gloves to maintain dexterity. Dawn came slowly, gray light spreading across the mountains. Marina could see the road clearly now, winding above her position. She spotted the curve where the vehicles would have to slow down. The distance was about 180 meters, an easy shot in good conditions. But shooting upward at an angle was more complicated than shooting level. She would have to account for that, adjusting her aim slightly. Morning passed into afternoon. Patrols walked the road twice, soldiers moving in formation, their eyes scanning the forest. They never looked down at the cliff face. Why would they? No one could approach from that direction. It was too steep, too exposed, too obvious. That was exactly why Marina had chosen it. She watched the soldiers pass almost directly above her, so close she could hear their conversations and the crunch of their boots on gravel. At 3 in the afternoon, she heard engines in the distance. Her body tensed slightly, then relaxed. This was the moment she had prepared for. The convoy appeared on the road, moving slowly and cautiously. The same 3 vehicles as before, arranged in the same pattern. Soldiers visible in the back, weapons ready. Everything exactly as she had observed. The first vehicle navigated the curve, slowing down significantly. The middle vehicle approached, its engine growling in low gear. Marina could see into the cab through her scope. The driver focused on the road. Beside him sat an officer. In the back seat, she glimpsed General Yashin's profile, his face stern and alert. The vehicle crawled through the turn, vulnerable and exposed for just a few seconds. Marina's breathing slowed. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the side window where Yashin sat. The vehicle moved slowly enough that tracking the target was easy. She had time to be perfect. Her father's voice spoke in her memory one more time. 1 shot, 1 kill. Make it count. The rifle fired, the sound echoing off the cliff walls. The bullet shattered the vehicle's window and struck Yashin in the head. Marina saw him slump sideways through the scope. The vehicle swerved slightly, then stopped. Soldiers jumped from all 3 vehicles, shouting and confused. Some fired their weapons randomly into the forest. Others took cover behind the vehicles. An officer was yelling orders, trying to organize a response, but nobody knew where the shot came from. Marina was already moving. She slung the rifle onto her back and began descending the cliff face. She moved quickly now, taking calculated risks, trusting her instincts. Below her, the cliff continued down into a narrow valley filled with forest. If she could reach those trees, she could disappear. Above her, soldiers would eventually figure out where the shot originated, but by then she would be gone. The descent was harder than the climb up. Gravity pulled at her, making it difficult to control her movement. Twice she slipped, catching herself at the last moment. Rocks broke loose under her feet, tumbling down the cliff face with loud clatters. But she kept moving, driven by urgency now. Speed mattered more than silence. She had to put distance between herself and the soldiers before they organized a proper search. She reached the valley floor 40 minutes after taking the shot. Her legs were shaking from exertion. Her hands were torn and bloody from gripping sharp rocks. But she was alive and free. She ran into the forest, moving away from the road, heading west toward a different mountain pass. Behind her, she could hear vehicles and shouting voices. The enemy was searching, but they were searching the wrong area, still focused on the forest near the road level. Marina traveled through the forest for the rest of the day and into the night. She did not stop until she was 20 kilometers from the ambush site. Finally, she allowed herself to rest in a small cave, hidden and secure. She ate some dried meat and drank water from a stream. Her body ached everywhere, but none of the pain mattered. General Yashin was dead. 2 generals down. 1 remained. 3 weeks after her first meeting with Victor, Marina received word that General Volkov would be traveling to inspect a supply depot outside the town of Krasnoye. The depot was located in a valley surrounded by forested hills. It was the kind of terrain Marina knew well, the kind of place where a skilled hunter could disappear like smoke. She left her village before dawn, carrying only what she needed. The rifle was wrapped in cloth and strapped to her back. She had ammunition, water, dried meat, and a thin blanket. Everything fit in a small pack that would not slow her down. She moved through the forest like her father taught her, stepping carefully, avoiding branches that might snap, staying in the shadows. The journey took her 6 hours. She was not in a hurry. Speed created noise, and noise created danger. She moved at a steady pace, stopping frequently to listen and observe. Enemy patrols moved through these forests, and she could not afford to be seen. Twice she heard soldiers talking and laughing as they walked along forest paths. Both times she froze, becoming perfectly still until they passed. They never knew she was there, just 10 meters away, watching them through the trees. By early afternoon, Marina reached the hills overlooking the supply depot. She found a position on the eastern slope, where the afternoon sun would be behind her. The location was perfect. A cluster of rocks and thick brush provided cover. The distance to the depot was about 400 meters, well within her range. She could see the entire facility clearly. Trucks were parked in neat rows. Soldiers moved between buildings carrying supplies and equipment. Marina settled into her position and began to wait. This was the hardest part, the part that separated real hunters from amateurs. Waiting required absolute discipline. Hours could pass. Weather could change. Discomfort had to be ignored. Her father once told her that patience was not about doing nothing. It was about doing everything with perfect stillness. It was about becoming part of the landscape, as natural as a stone or a tree. The general was expected to arrive before sunset. Victor's information said Volkov would inspect the depot personally, a rare appearance outside his secured mansion. Marina watched through her scope as the afternoon wore on. Soldiers came and went. Officers shouted orders. Everything looked routine and normal. She barely moved, breathing slowly, keeping her muscles relaxed. The rifle rested on a flat rock, steady and ready. At 5 in the evening, she heard vehicles approaching. 3 military trucks appeared on the road leading to the depot. They drove through the main gate and parked near the largest building. Soldiers jumped out, forming a security perimeter. Then a black car arrived, moving slowly and deliberately. This was different from the trucks. This was important. The car stopped and doors opened. Marina watched through her scope as officers emerged, their uniforms decorated with medals and insignia. Then she saw him, General Volkov. He was a tall man with gray hair and a thick mustache. He wore his uniform perfectly, every button polished, every crease sharp. He looked exactly like his photographs, exactly like the man who had ordered her father's death. Marina's heartbeat stayed calm and steady. This was not about emotion anymore. This was about precision, about doing one thing perfectly. She adjusted her scope slightly, accounting for the distance and the gentle breeze moving through the valley. Volkov walked toward the main building, surrounded by soldiers and officers. He was talking, gesturing with his hands, clearly giving orders. For several minutes, Marina could not get a clear shot. Too many people surrounded him, moving constantly, blocking her line of sight. She waited without frustration, without anxiety. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The prey will always give you an opportunity. You just have to be ready when it comes. Then the opportunity appeared. Volkov stopped at the entrance to the building, turning to speak to an officer beside him. For just a moment, the crowd around him shifted, creating a gap. Marina could see his chest and head clearly in her scope. The crosshairs settled on the center of his uniform. She took a slow breath in, let half of it out, and held the rest. Her finger squeezed the trigger smoothly, steadily, with no jerking motion. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through the scope, Marina saw Volkov stumble backward, his hand going to his chest. Then he fell. The soldiers around him scattered in confusion, shouting and pointing in different directions. Some dropped to the ground. Others raised their weapons, searching for the shooter. But they were looking in the wrong places, confused by how the sound echoed off the valley walls. Marina did not wait to watch more. She was already moving, sliding backward from her position, staying low. She wrapped the rifle and secured it to her back. Within seconds, she disappeared into the dense forest, moving quickly now but still carefully. Behind her, chaos erupted at the depot. Alarms sounded. Vehicles started their engines. Soldiers began searching the hills, but they were unorganized, panicked, searching everywhere and nowhere at once. She traveled for 3 hours through the forest before stopping to rest. By then, darkness had fallen completely. She found a hollow between two large rocks, covered herself with the blanket, and allowed herself to close her eyes. But she did not really sleep. Part of her mind stayed alert, listening to the sounds of the forest, ready to move if danger approached. News of General Volkov's death spread quickly. By the next morning, everyone in the region knew. The enemy command was in chaos. They could not understand how it happened. The security had been tight. The area had been cleared. Yet someone had gotten through, taken the shot, and vanished completely. Search parties combed the forest for 2 days but found nothing. No tracks, no evidence, no clue about who had done it or where they had gone. Marina returned to her village 3 days after the shooting. She arrived at night, slipping into her house without anyone seeing her. The next morning, she was in her garden, pulling weeds like she had never left. Neighbors saw her and waved. Some stopped to talk about the shocking news of the general's death. Marina listened with a blank expression, saying nothing important, showing no reaction. But Victor knew. When he came to her house that evening, he could barely contain his excitement. The resistance was celebrating. Morale had soared across the region. People were talking about hope again, about fighting back. The enemy seemed vulnerable now, not invincible. Marina listened to Victor's enthusiasm without smiling. She asked him a simple question. Where were the other 2 generals? Victor's excitement faded. He looked at her for a long moment, understanding what she meant. One general dead was impressive, shocking even. But it was not enough. The occupation continued. The brutality continued. 2 generals still controlled the region, still ordered executions, still destroyed lives. Marina was not done. She was just beginning. Victor returned 2 days later with more maps and information. General Petrov rarely left the military headquarters in the regional capital. The building was a fortress surrounded by walls, guards, and checkpoints. Getting a clear shot seemed impossible, but General Yashin traveled more frequently. He made regular visits to forward positions, inspecting troops and command posts. His route often took him through rural areas where security was less concentrated. Marina studied the information carefully. Yashin was more cautious after Volkov's death. His security had increased. He varied his routes and timing unpredictably. But Marina saw patterns that others missed. Yashin had a habit of visiting a particular command post every week. The post was located on a hill overlooking a strategic crossroads. The approach to the post followed a winding mountain road with steep cliffs on one side and forest on the other. She began planning her second operation. This one would be more difficult. Security would be tighter. The enemy would be watching for snipers now. But Marina had advantages they could not counter. She was patient. She was invisible. And she was already committed to seeing this through to the end, no matter what it cost. The morning sun barely touched the frozen ground when Marina Kovac opened her eyes in the small wooden house at the edge of the village. She was 23 years old, with dark hair pulled back tightly and eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. The war had been going on for 2 years now, and her village had changed completely. Where children once played in the streets, now only soldiers walked with heavy boots and worried faces. Marina lived alone now. Her father had been a hunter, the best in 3 villages. He taught her everything about shooting, tracking, and patience. When she was just 8 years old, he put a rifle in her hands for the first time. It was too heavy and she could barely hold it up. But her father was patient. He showed her how to breathe, how to wait, how to become part of the forest itself. By the time she was 15, she could shoot a running rabbit from 200 meters away. Her mother died when Marina was young, from sickness that the village doctor could not cure. Her father raised her alone, teaching her not just to hunt but to be strong and independent. He never treated her like she was weak because she was a girl. He treated her like a hunter, like a warrior. 3 months ago, enemy soldiers came to the village looking for resistance fighters. Her father tried to protect their neighbors. They shot him in the street like he was nothing. Marina buried him behind their house under the old oak tree where he used to sit and clean his rifles. She did not cry at the funeral. She stood there with her face like stone while the priest said prayers. The other villagers whispered about her. They said she was in shock, that the grief would come later. But Marina was not in shock. She was making plans. The enemy army had taken over the region 6 months before her father died. They were brutal and showed no mercy. Their generals believed in ruling through fear. Villages that resisted were burned. People who fought back were hanged in the town squares as examples. The 3 generals leading the occupation were famous for their cruelty. General Volkov was the worst. He personally ordered the execution of entire families. General Petrov destroyed villages just to prove his power. General Yashin was known for torturing prisoners to get information. These 3 men controlled everything in the region. They lived in a commandeered mansion 15 kilometers from Marina's village. They traveled with heavy security, moving between military bases and occupied towns. Everyone feared them. Everyone knew their names. Everyone wished they would disappear, but no one dared to act against them. After her father's death, Marina spent her days like she was waiting for something. She tended the small garden behind her house. She fixed the fence. She swept the floors. But at night she went into the forest with her father's best rifle. It was a hunting rifle, precise and reliable. Her father had maintained it perfectly for 20 years. Marina knew this rifle better than anything else in the world. In the forest, she practiced. She set up targets at different distances. 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters. She practiced in different weather. In rain and wind, in the early morning fog. She practiced until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil. She practiced until she could hit a target the size of a man's head from 500 meters away, every single time. The resistance fighters in the area heard about Marina's skills. They were a small group, mostly farmers and workers who had lost family members to the occupation. Their leader was a man named Victor, who had been a school teacher before the war. He came to Marina's house one evening, knocking softly on her door. Marina let him in without a word. Victor sat at her kitchen table, nervous and uncertain. He had known her father well. They used to play chess together on Sunday afternoons. Victor explained that the resistance was planning small operations, sabotaging supply lines and gathering intelligence. He asked if Marina wanted to help. She listened in silence, her face showing nothing. When Victor finished talking, Marina asked him one question. Could they get her close to the generals? Victor was surprised. He stammered, saying that was impossible, too dangerous, not what they did. Marina stood up and walked to the window. She told him in a quiet voice that if he could not help her with that, then she was not interested in helping them. She had her own war to fight. Victor left that night confused and worried. But 3 days later he returned. He brought maps and photographs. The resistance had been watching the generals for months, documenting their movements, their routines, their security. They had never planned to attack directly because it seemed impossible. The security was too tight. The risk was too high. Failure would mean brutal reprisals against the villages. But Victor saw something in Marina's eyes that made him reconsider. It was not just anger or revenge. It was cold determination. It was the patience of a hunter who could wait hours without moving for the perfect shot. He spread the maps on her kitchen table and showed her everything they knew. Marina studied the information for hours, asking detailed questions, making notes in a small journal. The generals moved between 3 locations regularly: the mansion where they lived, the military headquarters in the regional capital, and a forward command post near the front lines. They traveled in armored vehicles with armed escorts. They never followed the same schedule twice. They were careful men who understood they had enemies. Marina spent 2 weeks studying their patterns. She realized something the resistance had missed. The generals were careful, but they were also arrogant. They believed their security made them untouchable. They believed no one would dare attack them. That arrogance created small gaps, tiny moments of vulnerability. Marina just needed to find one gap, one moment, one clear shot. She told Victor she needed 3 things. First, information about when the generals would travel. Second, a way to position herself along their routes without being detected. Third, time and space to work alone. Victor agreed, though he clearly had doubts. He made Marina promise to be careful, to not take unnecessary risks. Marina nodded but made no real promises. She was already committed to a path that had only one destination. The next morning, Marina began preparing. She cleaned her rifle meticulously, checking every part. She gathered supplies for surviving in the wilderness for days if necessary. She sewed dark fabric into clothing that would help her blend into shadows and forests. She was becoming something new, something the enemy would never expect. She was becoming the answer to all those whispered prayers in occupied villages. She was becoming death itself, patient and inevitable,